strategy is available on the MFT.
Believe it or not, this is one of the world's most acclaimed and best-selling racing games. A sequel to this, which was a sequel to this.
Whoa, not okay there.
So, does its successor, Formula 1 22, resolve these problems? What do you think?
I ain't got time for this.
Fucking plows through it. Literally lands on my fucking car. Like.
I've played this game for dozens of hours and conclude that it's beautiful to look at, richly complex, and exhilarating to play, while finding half the time it's broken. From its AI to online connections and AI over online connections. After 13 games of refinement and online play being one of this franchise's biggest selling points in and outside of the game, it manages to break in almost every session I'm in. However, this is my fault, because Formula 1 is actually one of the worst driving games on the market, made exclusively for children. According to YouTube comments, as it says, real men don't play games, they play the far more sophisticated and superior simulators. So if these simulators are so much better, what happens when we take their word for it? One of the more recent is Automobilista 2, having gotten years worth of content updates from its humble Brazilian developer Raycevick, adding dozens of cars, tracks, liveries, and vital improvements to the game itself, with gameplay that's infinitely more complex than F1 can ever hope to be in its driving model, weather conditions, strategies, and handling. I really enjoy it. But does it resolve F1's problems?
Rolling Stone!
We have control? No, we don't. Oh my god, I'm inside Casey. I overtook Casey.
Oh,
here we go.
What's this?
We're gone.
I'm still in the menu.
Why is Jake overtaking us?
Why is Jake overtaking? Why is Orby overtaking us?
Is this how Jake is gonna win?
Why is Bartels in P1? Bartels is leading the race.
Bartels it, bro. Bartels
I am P3.
We are in first place. What the fuck?
I still don't have any control over the car. I have 15 seconds. 35 seconds of penalties. 35 seconds.
Shot it while it's there.
Right? It still says that.
And it's going another lap?
What the fuck?
There it is!
No, it's green.
Yeah, what the shit?
And that's not all. AI opponents phase through other racers, pit crews appear in the middle of the road, pit lane assists get you stuck, players get penalties before the race starts, disqualified players will flash in and out of a track for the entirety of a race. They'll also leave a permanent shadow on track. Races can start after the first corner, certain vehicles will twerk on track, all vehicles mega twerk in the pits, default cameras phase through vehicles, restarting after a crash won't add your missing components, whatever this is. Oh, and most of these existed in the last game to use this engine 6 years ago. One could argue this game's more fun to drive than F1, but in terms of cohesion and polish, there's no question as to which is more broken. And it's not just bugs, but design which can be confused for bugs. Default setups for Indy fail to reach their top speed. Involuntarily disconnected players are forbidden from ever rejoining a race in progress. Even these camera angles in the replay mode aren't available on the heads-up display, but hidden via keyboard shortcuts also carried over from that 6-year-old game. However, this is once again my fault. The comment never mentioned Automobilista 2, but R-Factor 2, considered by many to be the simulation king, especially in regards to physics. And it's the official video game of the virtual 24 Hours of Le Mans, possibly the biggest event in all of sim racing with Formula 1 drivers and champions at the helm. Does it resolved F1's problems. Well, actually, that was 5 months ago. And recently, there was a patch fixing the AI that's been a problem since the Sebring update in 2018. Never mind that. It's been fixed now. Just watch turn 1 at Skip Barber. Sebring. Nürburgring. Well, actually, you're not supposed to play R-Factor 2 offline. Apparently. This game was really built for online competitions. 9 years after launch, filled with premium content and scheduled league racing where you can at any time sign up for a total of 5 events, half of which require multiple pieces of paid content. Cars sell for $7 each. Circuits are sometimes double that. All for this pulse-pounding action. This was the free playlist. 6 p.m. on a Sunday. Assetto Corsa then. It doesn't have the population trouble of R-Factor 2. In fact, it's retained one of the most dedicated communities in all of gaming with over 20,000 mods and counting. Again, I adore this game, and I've got family members who adore it even more than me. It can't possibly then have F1's problems. At this point, you're probably wondering, why not just play arcade racing games instead? And I do. Whether it's jet skis, anti-gravity, cell shading, photogrammetry, motorcycles, hovercycles, dirt, tarmac, wheel, pad, clean, rough, online, offline, I'm there. The point about sim racing specifically is, with the exception of 2 games, both of which have a big asterisk, this pathetic subgenre of sweaty nerds justifying their personal sinkhole that only accepts money, this is mine, is packed to the brim with objectively broken features and content that makes Cyberpunk's launch seem ethical. That is to say, a better problem than arcade racers have. Basically, there aren't any. Burnout was abandoned by Electronic Arts. Sega shelved everything but the occasional kart racer. Microsoft gave up Project Gotham Racing, and Sony shut down its closest analog in Drive Club that itself overwrote MotorStorm. Capcom left eons ago and are never coming back. Neither is Rockstar's Midnight Club due to other occupations. Ubisoft bought the Driver IP and shelved it after 1 game for The Crew, which hasn't had a new game in 5 years. Ridge Racer hasn't had one in 8, a console one in 11, a main one in 17. Blur and Split Second had their sequels cancelled, and as great as Forza Horizon 5 is, aspects of it are still inferior to the original, continuously mudding up progression via horns, shoes, and automated text messages. Even less progress was made with Grid Legends, doubling down on a story mode that manages to backtrack from the original series it so desperately throws fan service to. It's very sad, but just about the only well-funded arcade racer you can buy today is Need for Speed. The franchise from 1994 that took over the world is pretty well the only one left in the game. And even Unbound comes with a catch. While I love the effects, music, personality, customization, and the genuine attachment you build in making a specialized car, content-wise, Unbound makes Halo Infinite look like Skyrim. To unlock certain vehicles in a class, they require 30 playlists, that's 90 races, with a specific manufacturer to be completed. So, how many playlists do 4 of the 5 classes have? 20? 15? 10? Nope. 6. Which might be fair if each of the races within a playlist were unique. But they're not, repeating circuits across all tiers in the game multiple times. It's a far, far cry from Project Gotham Racing's 200 layouts. So just like Halo Infinite, even though I want to keep playing this game I genuinely enjoy, warts and all, I just can't. There's not enough there. I'm not picky. I'm not looking for sim racing, simcade, or arcade. I'm just desperate. Desperate for one racing game without a catch. You know what Forza Motorsport 7's catch is? It can't even be bought. Gran Turismo 7 then. It seems to be all things to all men. It's gorgeous to look at, beautiful to control, mostly, and even more pleasant to just vibe in. Half of Gran Turismo's appeal really is just navigating well-crafted menus, listening to relaxing music while steadily progressing from used Dodge Neons to Pikes Peak monsters. Except that doesn't exist in Gran Turismo 7 because GT Life has been replaced by these infamous cafe books that's effectively just a battle pass, drip feeding you minuscule rewards and wheel spins that manage to be even more insulting than what came before.
What the fuck?
Also, you can play Sport Mode online with zero improvements made from its predecessor, ignoring all the exploits and obviously bad behavior, yet doesn't let you play with friends in the name of competition. Even iRacing allows friends to join your sessions. The game that black flags you for dumping the clutch on pit row permits its drivers to have more fun than Polyphony does. In fact, of all the games that exist in this entire genre, iRacing is one of the only with a quality variety of content that lets you play with friends and is stable enough to host events longer than 20 minutes. So what's the catch? No thank you. This here is an assortment of driving games released in the last decade. How many of them have a party system? Matchmaking. Custom lobbies. With bots. And custom presets. Online stability. A career mode that isn't bare bones. A story mode that isn't garbage. I think you get the picture. I love racing games. I always have. And I'm only binging them more now as an adult with groups of friends across all subgenres, and it's been fantastic fun. Dirt 3, Blur, and Driver San Francisco are some of the greatest multiplayer ever conceived. And once you've battled someone wheel to wheel for entire laps online, pushing each other on a wire right to the edge without ever falling off, a split-second firefight just seems kinda boring. Yet that's the reputation driving games have. And it's not because this genre isn't accessible to the greater gaming public. Far too many have disproven that. Whenever asking friends and colleagues who don't play these games, they almost always get nostalgic for things like Need for Speed Underground, Gran Turismo 4, or Forza Horizon. I think it's because in terms of game design and identity, right now, this genre is decades behind everything else. And until these games are able to be varied, original, functional, and affordable at the same time, it's going to keep embarrassing itself. Some of you knew this was coming. Video games across the globe have been pushing esports. I'm not really into it, but there's more than enough remarkable matches, players, casters, and productions over the years that one can't simply write it off. Unless it's racing, because despite all the funding, talent, and dedicated game design poured into it, we're still at a point where the biggest esports racing event in the world had dozens of its competitors be disconnected on top of the entire server dying twice, along with its IP address being publicly available on Steam. Could you imagine anything like this level of incompetence for League, Counter-Strike, or Siege? It wouldn't be allowed 10 years ago, let alone today. And while yes, this event was publicly ridiculed, I've got to ask, Why did it take an all-new low to be reached until players finally stood up in unison to say that R-Factor 2 is broken? This event was nothing new. Max Verstappen, the star driver who called this clown show what it is, suffered connection errors in the same event 2 years ago. And the game's poor stability has been established in the community for years. Yet it was persistently excused or ignored by fans and developers in favor of adding more overpriced content that was always celebrated. This is why. This is why the genre sucks. When a game's been demanding money, and lots of it, for 10 fucking years, and it still can't offer a reliable experience online or off, what's to defend? And when an entire genre has been lagging behind everything else in a multi-billion-dollar industry, everybody should be saying so. I said I'm desperate, which I am. But more than that, I'm tired. And there's 3 things in particular I'm really tired of. The AI in F122, treating players as if they kicked their granny in the cooter. It doesn't exist in Grid Legends. There is the Nemesis system, where drivers you've made ongi will take themselves out of the race trying to kill you, but everyone else backs off when they're approaching corners and only charges up the inside when there's a viable chance to overtake, and it's nonsense. Because this is Codemaster's arcade racer. Vehicles are built like a Toyota Hilux, handling's more forgiving than my mother, and the AI crashes themselves out every race in spectacular fashion. Why isn't the AI behavior in these 2 games swapped? Why not use F122's aggression in the game that supports it? Is being a nemesis against 1 or 2 drivers really so vital that the other 20 need to be pushovers on the highest difficulty? I can only judge from the outside, but from the outside, it's hard to understand the priorities this company has regarding its franchises. Now, how a game can weigh said priorities is varied, but it's almost always present in this genre. Returning to Automobilista 2, it had a gap between Part 2 and Part 3 of its USA expansion of 11 months. Suffering delay after delay as Ray's tiny team devoted themselves to converting their overtly unpolished game into an oval racer. And it sucks. The AI doesn't know how to handle these circuits or the pack racing they create. Currently, GT1s feel more like Indy cars than the Indy cars, and after all of that, the total number of super speedways is 3. I don't get it. I don't get why adding one niche mode the game can't properly facilitate nor host enough content for, even if people did love it, was what demanded top priority for a year. And if the development team is so small, why promise not 2 or 3 Indy cars, but 17 of them? Why do that to yourself? And who is asking for it? The bloat is of galactic proportions. It's no coincidence that one of the only games in this genre that's stable online is dedicated to one style of racing. It's got plenty of other faults, but dumping heaps of time and money into bad content nobody plays isn't one of them. I mean, who played the music drive in GT7 outside of waiting for the game to install, drove the supercars in F122, or grinded in Project Cars 3? It's so much of this crap that's led to games which failed to improve upon their predecessors from 2 console generations ago, and broken fundamentals of the experience being left virtually unchanged. And by fundamentals, I don't mean simulation, because simulator is just a name. And I feel like we had a better understanding of this when I was a kid. My dad didn't buy Gran Turismo reading that subtitle thinking, wow, it is real life. Racing sims no different than Spectacle Fighter, Dungeon Crawler, or Metroidvania. It was just meant to distinguish these games from Mario Kart and Ridge Racer. It wasn't taken so goddamn literally that you had gamers arguing with real racing drivers about their own cars. I don't care how much CPU data is being used to accurately model tires, your simulation is still a video game, and far too often a really bad one. This quote from IGN about Gran Turismo 5 has only gotten worse. If GT5 is a 5 out of 10 game with its clunky interface, recycled car list, and dated online play, what's Assetto Corsa? It might be a better simulator, but as a game, it's not even in the same galaxy. The UI is so bad, the community had to make their own launcher to avoid it. There's no music, artwork, sounds, or style of any capacity, something even early Sims often had, and a career mode that's so half-assed I keep forgetting it even exists. And R-Factor 2 is even worse. Then, after all the blood, sweat, and tears poured into making a game that's literally sacrificing everything in the name of realism, the games host a big competition that utterly discredits the product as anything other than just that. A game.
After a while, I started to realize, we're not actually driving a sim anymore. We're turning it into an arcade through setting up the cars in a way that's not realistic, through changing my driving style in a way that just was like driving something on NASCAR 08. It got to the point where it just didn't feel like racing anymore. It felt like some sort of arcade video game.
It's the same thing in R-Factor, it's the same thing in Assetto Corsa. These are games. And as much fun as I have setting up races in Assetto Corsa that aren't possible anywhere else, or recreating my favorite car chases in BeamNG, it would be nice to play an actual game instead of a self-maintained playset. What does it say about this subgenre that one of the most notable features about Project Cars 2 is being able to host private lobbies? You know what game let you do that? Halo 2 on the Xbox. You know why Need for Speed Unbound's graffiti effects were controversial? Because it's the first racing game in years that doesn't look identical to everything else on the market. You seriously mean to tell me during the 2000s among Automoto Lisa, Burnout, Crazy Taxi, Midtown Madness, Outrun, F-Zero, XG3, R-Racing, and Kirby Air Ride that this would have been crossing the line? No. It's because now that all of those names are dead, and racing games have been selling us the same cars with the same tracks with the same promises that mean absolutely nothing, 2D smoke trails are like vegetables to a heroin addict. It'd been so long since a racing game had a truly unapologetic style and identity that it was a shock to people's systems. The reason casual players don't pay attention to racing games, aside from their generally middling production value, is because they can't tell the difference between them. And who can blame them? Why would anybody except the hardcore pay attention to spring dampeners, tire pressures, or weight transfer? All they see is a McLaren going around a racetrack they already drove 20 years ago with no coherence in racing disciplines, car culture, or even tone. The death of all the arcade racers mentioned previously came along with it the death of distinct games in this entire genre. There's no longer any dedication to mapping out the real streets of exotic cities like Project Gotham, recreating film classics in Driver, or the legitimized racing events in Pro Street and commitment to spectacle in Split Second. The only quality game in recent memory carrying that torch is Wreckfest. Not because of its destruction, but presenting a unique form of racing no one else is matching with nearly all the features, vehicles, tracks, and events somebody would want from it. I mean, doesn't this look fun? It doesn't need the Nürburgring again, the latest supercar, wet weather puddles, reflections off the engine bay, or any of the other crap that's been sold to the same group of people for a decade now. It's just a fun video game. Made by people who had their priorities straight, weren't hung up on creating an impossible simulation, and were dedicated to properly evolving what creatively set them on the map. And to everyone that says, you can't do anything new with a racing game, I've got something to share with you. These are a collection of original pieces by Principal Art Director at Behavior Interactive, Gregory from MONTE. And I'm seeing in these images a racing game I've never played before. Not Need for Speed meets Burnout, not Forza meets Test Drive Unlimited, but Dirt meets Half-Life. Flicking a Quattro through City 17's streets, sliding out 37s underneath Authority ships, stopping outside megastructures, refueling in the desert, partying outside the city, or going head-to-head on an aircraft carrier. I'm imagining stages that take place within derelict spaceships, airdropping onto futuristic cities, Pathfinder as your navigator, and teleporting between multiple environments in a single stage. You could do anything. Imagine letting a stage designer go nuts with this. What would happen in a game where the cars are of our world, but the levels aren't? And this is all just one concept. Did you know it's been 20 years since the last F-Zero game, and that Shigeru Miyamoto claimed to not have a single idea for a new game in those 20 years? Off the top of my head, F-Zero's my team with R&D trees, contract negotiations, and rivalry systems. To my understanding, Capcom doesn't own a patent to sell shaded cars. Anybody could try Jet Set Radio meets Gran Turismo once more. It is criminal. The only driving game to utilize Driver San Francisco's shift mechanic is Driver San Francisco. Make a game that finally iterates NASCAR's respect meter, or roleplay as your driver to the point of sustaining injuries during crashes or maybe being put out for good. Starting a new run in a new age a la Reigns. Put a Need for Speed game in Night City with its set of cars, or a Twisted Metal game in Mad Max with its set of cars. And those are just high-level concepts. That's before innovating within the games themselves, like player-controlled practice zones a la the Riff Repeater in Rocksmith, letting people party up into teams of 2 online in season events, or take F1's career mode online with a league of competitors individually developing their cars and transferring teams. There's so much originality ripe for the taking in this genre that'd be accessible to everybody, not just the hardcore fans enduring this current drought. And thankfully some of it is available in the indie scene, with Art of Rally's superb original soundtrack and clean aesthetic, Inertial Drift's completely new take on a manner a driving game is played, and Spin Tires, which has evolved into the Mud Runner series. Creating such an original yet intuitive off-road driving model, even MMOs are ripping it off. The indies don't excuse, however, the overall genre's current state. Its lack of innovation, priorities, self-awareness, or most importantly, progress. I am not disrespecting the amazing work that's been done in this space, only that things like laser scan circuits, direct communication with race teams, and budgets that are among the highest in recorded history are being wasted. The best Forza is over 10 years old. The best Need for Speed is nearly 20. The best rally game is 1 year from 20, the 2 best NASCAR games are 20, and the best F1 game is more than 20. And the best IndyCar game is a lot older than that. The GT3 cars in Assetto Corsa Competizione are more enjoyable to drive when they're ported into the original Assetto Corsa. Forza Motorsport 4 sounds better than 7. Drive Club's effects on PS4 are superior to Gran Turismo's on PS5. And bugs we're experiencing in F1 22 have appeared in 2014. This doesn't feel like a decade of progress. I said last year that F1 2020 has granted some of the most fun I've had gaming in years, and I stand by that. Codemasters have made an excellent core game, repeatedly, but its problems brewing underneath the surface have been getting worse and worse and worse. Even friends and I in our weekly league would be willing to move on to an alternative in a heartbeat. But that's the problem. There isn't one. Not one everybody can afford, at least. I understand why sports games have these issues. In most cases, the annual release of hockey, football, and football are the only releases of each sport. But racing games don't have that excuse. There's exclusivity deals, sure, but it doesn't stop people from making games that include particular forms of motorsports, whether that's F1, rallying, or dinosaurs. And yet we seem to have been trapped since the 8th generation console launch. We're on the horizon of a new generation of games coming up from Microsoft, Ubisoft, EA, alongside all new big players and independents. And despite this video's tone, I am very sympathetic to their challenges, because driving games might just be the hardest genre in this industry. It costs iRacing $150,000 to make one circuit, $500,000 in the case of the Nürburgring. Need for Speed uses 12 microphones to record a single vehicle. Technology like the Madness engine calculates so many variables for the circuits, vehicles, and weather that developers are still reining it in over 10 years since it debuted. From keeping a circuit driven thousands of times varied, to syncing dozens of players all over the world with pixel precision, and creating hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of unique vehicles that all look, sound, and feel great, these games challenge virtually every facet of technology, feedback, and design. But if these games are going to charge top dollar, and they very much are, then it isn't wrong to expect them to evolve. More than anything, I just want these games to be judged within the industry they're a part of. For too long, people in and outside of the community have been dividing them up into different subgenres, isolating them from each other, let alone shooters, roguelikes, MOBAs, RPGs, etc. And all it's accomplished is complacency, from publishers, developers, and even players. And if that never changes, this genre never will. So, I kinda wish I got COVID, because what I had instead seemed to be a hell of a lot worse. The gods of gaming punished me for canceling a Dead Space video I was working on in January so much that I couldn't do anything for the next 3 weeks, coughing my lungs out enough times that there was no break in between to sleep. Sorry for being gone for so long, and especially if you were looking for a less niche topic. But I had to admit that this was the video I really wanted to make. And before answering questions, I want to tell you that I'm now working with a company called More Yellow, who are looking for sponsorships. Despite my warnings that I am extremely picky and have turned down every single offer in the past. I'm apprehensive. I've already supplied them a long list of those who I don't want anywhere near me, and should an ad ever be on the table, I'm going to run it by my patrons first, to assure their placement isn't detrimental. That's all for now. We'll see what happens in the future. In the meantime, balls. Only if they're innovative. Why do you look like that? Like what? What's the most forgettable NFS game, and why is it Most Wanted 2005? You know, this is exactly the bait I expect from somebody who asks me balls. What's the most forgettable car in Most Wanted 2005? Of the whole roster? Mazda RX-8. Got you, Casey. The Clio. At least, that's the car I keep forgetting is in the game, which is weird, because the Clio V6 is one of my favorite cars, yet I never use it in that game, probably because it fits the game's American industrial atmosphere about as well as a baguette belongs in a diner. Thoughts on the Dead Space remake? Haven't played it yet. Do you plan it? Okay, I'm actually really curious to see what I'll think about it, because Dead Space has always been a game that does everything on paper that I'm supposed to like, yet I don't really. The reason I canceled a video on Dead Space 2 is because I keep dropping its campaign in the early hours. Very much a control situation. I can recognize the game's high quality, and yet, it doesn't do anything for me personally. Many of the changes I've heard for the remake, however, sound really appealing to me, so I am going to give it a shot one day. Because part of me really wants to love these games as much as everybody else does. Do you plan on ever doing a video on Halo Infinite in the near future? No plans. But if I do, it'd have to be an outside perspective. I played the game at launch, enjoyed it for what it was, and then never played it again after the new year for more than a handful of matches. It's really a shame that of all the games to be hurt by Microsoft and 343's inability to launch a Halo game in a feature-rich state, the most damage had to be done to the game which seemed to capture people's interest the most. Because there were a brief couple weeks there where everyone I knew was playing Infinite. Just like the old days of Halo 3. But unlike Halo 3, there was nothing to keep them around for more than those couple of weeks. It was fun while it lasted, I guess. At least now we all know for a fact that people saying for years that Halo had to change its core gameplay and style to appeal to people really were full of it. Have you ever thought of creating your own narrative/world? I'm an aspiring writer, so the answer is, of course. And I do dabble in between YouTube videos writing up scripts, and one of my favorite things to do with colleagues is brainstorm. Currently, a dear friend and I are working on a screenplay together, but for now, YouTube is how I make a living, and I'm not nearly rich enough to take that much time off. So, I'll come to those things later. When ye reviewing Cyberpunk-y? In time. You gonna give us dating advice? Go to the liquor store. That's what I did. What's your favorite kind of cheese? Wensleydale. With berries? When will you play Wasteland 3? After the next third-party Fallout. Is sleep the greatest and most fun power-up in Garfield Kart? Nothing in Garfield Kart is the most fun. Forza or Gran Turismo? Gran Turismo. I do generally prefer its physics model and progression, but it's also literally the first video game I ever played, so I'm biased as fuck. What's the first thing I do in Canada besides leave? Play chicken with a moose. Top 5 JDM cars. No particular order. When will you start getting Adam and Eve sponsors? Now, I guess.